I'm excited that we're joined today by a special guest, Nikhil Pahwa, the founder and CEO of MediaNama, joining us live from India to talk about India's recent ban of 59 Chinese apps. MediaNama is a publication in India focused on tech policy and regulation. Great to have you here, Nikhil. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Alex. This is an interesting time to be in India, especially with everything that's happening on tech policy. Things have been moving at a really fast clip for the last 2.5 years in the tech policy space. So there's never a dull day.
Yes, and certainly the past couple of days have probably been extremely grueling for you. I know you've been on opining a lot on what's happened recently. So why don't you just give us the high level? What happened? What did India recently do? Why are we talking today?
A couple of days ago at about 8:30 at night India time, it's about 7:30 right now in the evening. A couple of days ago at 8:30 at night, India issued a press release announcing that 59 Chinese apps are being banned in India. And they didn't specifically mention Chinese apps, but they've said that they've issued an order under Section 69 of the IT Act that there were some apps which were found to be concerning related to the sovereignty of India, and that there are data protection and privacy issues with these apps. Now, all the apps listed in that are some of the most popular Chinese apps in the world. So there is TikTok that's been banned. There is Vigo Live. There is Cam Scanner, which a lot of people use for scanning documents. There's an app called Share It, which people use to transfer when they buy a new phone, to transfer it in all their settings and all the apps to a new phone. So that they use Share It. So there are 59 apps in that list, and each and every single one of them is Chinese. The Chinese embassy hasn't taken very lightly. They issued a strongly worded statement saying that they have serious concerns about this violating WTO norms, and they've issued they've said that this is against free market operations. The irony of that. China is not very happy, and India is also there's a bunch of support for India and Indian apps. There are clones of these Chinese apps that are already being talked about. There's a new app called Chingari, which was launched to counter TikTok. So it's a fun situation with just all the action happening right now. But what's not fun is what led to this situation. So in April, there was India found that there were Chinese troops that were setting up camp around what is called the line of actual control. So India shares a border with China, and there's a border dispute. So the operative line, which both countries territory around which both countries claim, and they have fought a war over, but neither country sets up camp in. The Chinese started amassing sort of troops over there. So there were skirmishes between the two countries, and 20 Indian soldiers were killed. Now the understanding is that no shots would be fired, so no guns were used. And we saw horrific images of rods with nails on them being used to brutally attack the Indian side. At least that's what emerged in the Indian media.
These were like, kind of like IEDs, improvised explosive devices. You said they weren't firing bullets, but these were...
No explosives. So they were essentially almost like a baseball bat kind of a thing. There were rods into which nails had been sort of hammered in, and they were used to physically assault the Indian side, is what we've been told. So it was a physical attack. There were no shots, there were no IEDs, there were no bombs.
This was an up close and personal attack. I mean, this wasn't just some accident. This was that's devastating. You don't hear that in the news, by the way. I have an article here from the South China, Post, right? And in the article it says the unprecedented move, which came weeks after 20 soldiers died in a border clash in the Himalayas. But the article doesn't say that it was 20 Indian soldiers that was killed, and it doesn't go into it. But that's very important context here as to, what just happened a couple weeks ago.
You also have to understand the terrain at which this is happening. These are some of the highest mountains in the world. This is the highest mountain range in the Himalayas. And I have been in that area, and those mountains are almost vertical. So this is a valley called the Galwan Valley, and there have been troops. There's been a buildup of troops in, from what I understand, 6 different locations, including one of the most beautiful lakes in the world at a very high altitude. Yesterday we heard that there were more troops that were amassing around another border area that China claims. So there is movement from China into Indian territory, or territory which both India and China claim. But as a ceasefire, there was neither of them were setting up camp in. A few years ago, in another area called Doklam. What I remember from the tech policy grade point around Doklam was that there was a worry about UC News, an app in India at that time, a Chinese app which was run by UC Browser, and UC Browser is owned by Alibaba. So at that point in time, UC Browser, which essentially kind of like the old Opera browser, which would compress data before serving it to you, that was the most popular browser in India. Safari is almost non-existent. Google Chrome was huge. Firefox is small, but at that time, UC Browser was the largest browser in India, about 60% of the market, right? And they also had a corresponding news app called UC News, which was aggregating news. So there was a suspicion in the grapevine that UC News was suppressing Indian articles that were anti-China, and it was allowing highlighting of the Chinese point of view. That's the concern that was there in the Indian government. So the fact is that Chinese apps can be used for misinformation and disinformation campaigns, and to change people's perspectives on a particular situation depending on what news they surface. So this move by India to ban these apps is, the way I see it, it's largely political, it's largely preventive. It's kind of, they want to send a message to China. I don't think this is around data privacy, even though that is a concern. And in fact, data privacy issues related to TikTok have been raised in the Indian Parliament about a year ago. In July, several members of Parliament had raised issues saying that they're taking data from Indians and taking the data to China, which is again, that entire conversation around digital sovereignty, which I'm sure we will get into it.
On that note, I think if this was around, data privacy, there could have been other actions that were taken in the past. But the other part of this is just reciprocity, right? And we've talked about this many times on the show on Winner Take All around, China has a walled garden for any tech company to access its market.
Yeah.
But there's no reciprocity elsewhere, right? Chinese apps can pretty much freely flow into other countries. And countries like the US are slowly starting to look at this. India, I'd say, has probably been much more progressive. Like if we think about the marketplace regulation that they put on foreign entities owning marketplaces, you can't have a marketplace as well as, be a kind of traditional e-commerce seller in India, right? Like the restrictions they put on Walmart, for example, or Amazon in India. So I feel like, to me, this was a very smart political move because it was a way for them to retaliate to China in a very strong way without, more physical harm and without actually doing it in a, in a military fashion to escalate things, but to do it in a, technology, right? Do you like this move? As opposed to, say, other ways to try to escalate things, but to kind of move it into the tech arena?
So I think there is escalation, there's an attempt at de-escalation on the physical side, but I believe there is escalation on the digital side. So there were news items that came out about 5 days ago, and quoting unnamed government sources, and sometimes that's just the government trying to plant a particular point of view before it takes action, saying that there have been cyber attacks on the Chinese side on Indian government websites, etc., etc. So it could have been in retaliation to that, alongside what else is going on. But it could also very well have been, in a sense, to stir up nationalistic sentiments and try and stir up, cohesive sort of some kind of cohesion in the Indian population, saying that, look, we're doing something against China when China is doing something to us. So, look, at the same time, I mean, if you look at China's actions over the last few months, the incursions into India, some actions around the South China Sea, it also seems to be the same thing that China is doing. That they seem to be escalating things around or escalating certain issues, because that again will get the population to support the CCP and the Chinese government at a time when it's probably a bit weak given the pandemic. So this is more for a domestic constituency. And I think from an India perspective also, this move is also to feed a domestic sentiment and feed a domestic constituency. I don't necessarily see this as a strategic long-term kind of a move.
If you work at TikTok in India, there's an article here that says they have 2,000 employees in India. Are you looking for another job right now?
Well, no one knows, right? We don't know how long this is going to last. From a user perspective, the creators in India seem to be very unhappy because TikTok was a huge platform for them. One thing to remember, India accounts for 30% of TikTok's global users. Not much in terms of revenue, but at least in terms of user base, right? India's got some 625 million internet connections. We have the highest number of users for Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, TikTok, and a bunch of others. We also have, a large base that's coming online. Like, we've got the cheapest data connections in the world. For about $7 a month, you can get 1 GB per day.
Is that Geo?
That's not just Geo. So it's Geo and others, because Geo has brought the competition down. And what's happened is that an average Indian user uses about 10 to 11 GB of data per month on a mobile internet connection. So we've seen usage go up, costs go down. Every company is looking at India as a potentially huge market, because it's a democracy unlike China, so it's open to other entities coming in. But what we've also seen is that since 2015, there has been a buildup of tech nationalism in a sense. There's a pushback against other countries or companies from other countries, not just the Chinese entities in this instance, but also against Google, Facebook, not Microsoft much, but yeah, Amazon definitely. There were protests outside the stadium when Jeff Bezos was in India in January, and giving and basically announcing a huge investment in the Indian market. So Indian traders have been worried. There are political organizations that have been campaigning against Amazon and TikTok, for example, for the last few years. Some of that is coming to fruition now. The other thing that you'll find interesting, just moving to sovereignty, is that from what I understand at the open-ended working group in the UN, India has submitted its filing in which it said that a nation's sovereignty ought to extend to data, no matter where that data is stored in the world. Now, that filing was pulled from the site in 3 days. So I don't know whether they asked for it to be kept confidential or not, but that's what we noticed. So for me, that's really interesting, because, you've seen India's largest industrialist, Mukesh Ambani, who owns Reliance Jio, and even major politicians talk about data as being the new oil, data as being a national asset. And most Indian policies are geared up towards increasing control over the internet. So I'm kind of afraid that we might be headed slowly in the China direction ourselves. But I think India's decision is that they'll not go that far. They'll be somewhere in the middle. They'll have their own definition, their own approach to the internet.
Everyone's moving in the China direction. If the China direction is more control over data and internet, every country is moving in that direction, unfortunately, US included. Although I have liked India's approach to try to find somewhat of a happy medium. How do I still, support a local homegrown tech community and put some guardrails on how these foreign tech monopolies, whether they're from the US or China, put some guardrails so that I give some advantages to my local Indian tech companies? I feel like they've done a pretty good job of trying to find that balance, especially compared to, other countries in the global kind of tech economy. So, like you were talking about here with Jio, Facebook put $5.7 billion in. Now they've got money from Silver Lake and Vista and KKR. Was that viewed negatively with all these kind of US, both tech and private equity investors?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that when Facebook put in that kind of money and took about 10% stake in Jio, it was people in India were acting as if Facebook has bought Jio. But they didn't get a board. They got a board seat, but an observer board seat, so they're not necessarily involved in decision making. And they've got a commerce partnership that they're going to use to compete against Amazon and Flipkart. So WhatsApp is huge in India, about 400 million monthly active users. And that's a 2017 number, right? So it's a 2018 number. So it's huge. But WhatsApp hasn't been able to monetize. So for Facebook, what they're trying to do is they've enabled WhatsApp for business, where businesses can communicate with their customers, handle customer queries, send transactional messages. Now they're looking to enable omni-channel commerce on WhatsApp. So effectively, WhatsApp is going in the WeChat direction here. Now, Jio has not, and WhatsApp has struggled to launch payments because India mandated data localization. And so this partnership with Jio means that Jio is setting up something called Jio Mart for aggregating omnichannel commerce. And those products, those stores will be available on WhatsApp. Both these companies have struggled in commerce and payments. And I think what we'll see is that, at least my view is that neither of them could have succeeded independently, because you've got Amazon, you've got, they split the market between them over there. And then on the payment side, where WhatsApp is trying to operate, you've got PhonePe, which is owned by Walmart. You've got Paytm, which is owned by Alibaba, or significant stake by Alibaba. You've got Google Pay. So there are a bunch of these guys who are competing in both commerce and payments. And Facebook and Jio have both failed to make a mark over there. So they're better off together than competing, because they wouldn't be able to win this battle by themselves.
Really insightful, Nikhil. It's getting late over there. I don't want to keep you any longer. Would love to have you back on the show. Really loved the insights. Lots of interesting things going on in the Indian market, both with this Chinese app ban, but also elsewhere. So thanks so much for joining us. Stay well, my friend, and I'll talk to you soon.
You too, Alex. Thanks for having me on. Good fun.